Have you ever noticed how some people feel most alive when they're at home? Not excited, not stimulated, just settled. Like their body finally exhales the moment the door closes behind them. They cancel plans without guilt. They don't feel bored by quiet evenings. They don't crave constant movement or noise. And from the outside, that can look strange, even concerning. People assume it means something is wrong, that they're hiding, that they're afraid of life. But if you look closer, if you really pay attention, you begin to see that loving home is not a lack of desire, it's a response. A deeply learned one. We live in a world that worships motion, being out, being visible, being busy. A full calendar is treated like a personality trait. Silence is suspicious. Stillness is mistaken for stagnation. So when someone chooses to stay in, chooses the same walls, the same room, the same quiet routine, they're often judged as lazy, antisocial, or disconnected. But those labels miss something important, because for many people, home is not about withdrawal, it's about relief. People who love staying at home are rarely avoiding life itself. They're avoiding overload. They're avoiding the constant pressure to perform, to respond, to be on. Home becomes the one place where nothing is required of them. No masks, no small talk, no constant adjustment to other people's expectations. Just space. And that space feels like oxygen. This preference doesn't appear randomly. It almost always has a history, often rooted in childhood environments that were emotionally loud, unpredictable, or demanding. A child growing up around tension, conflict, or inconsistency learns very quickly where safety exists. Sometimes safety isn't found in people, it's found in solitude, in a room with a closed door, in routines that don't change, in places where the nervous system doesn't have to stay alert. Over time, the body remembers this. The nervous system learns a simple equation. Inside is calm, outside is effort. Inside is predictable, outside is noise. Home becomes associated with regulation, with recovery, with control. And as that child grows into an adult, the attachment remains. Loving home becomes less about preference and more about physiology. The body knows where it can finally rest. At first, this is healthy, necessary even. Staying home feels restorative, like plugging yourself back into something stable after being drained. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the comfort deepens. The outside world begins to feel heavier by comparison. Invitations feel like obligations. The effort required to leave feels disproportionate to the reward. And without realizing it, staying home stops being a choice and starts becoming the default. This is where the paradox begins, because the same walls that once protected you can also begin to narrow your world. Comfort is powerful. It doesn't demand anything. It doesn't challenge you. It doesn't surprise you. And that's exactly why it can quietly take over. Not aggressively, not dramatically, but patiently. Like a room that grows smaller so slowly you don't notice until movement feels awkward. People who love staying home rarely describe themselves as lonely, and often they aren't. They may have rich inner lives, deep thoughts, strong imaginations, but there's a subtle contraction that can happen when comfort replaces exploration. The unfamiliar starts to feel more draining than it used to. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's unpracticed, like stepping into cold air after being inside too long. There's often a quiet awareness beneath this, a sense that home feels good, but also a vague feeling of disconnection. Not sadness, not anxiety, just a subtle dullness, a sense that life is stable but muted, safe but slightly distant. And that contradiction is hard to explain, even to yourself. Psychology helps illuminate why this happens. Our nervous systems are designed to seek regulation. For people who are more sensitive to stimulation, social environments can quickly overwhelm the system. Noise, crowds, conversations, expectations, they all require constant processing. For some, this energizes. For others, it exhausts. Home becomes the place where the nervous system finally downshifts, where the brain leaves vigilance mode and enters rest. Research on overstimulation and temperament shows that people don't differ in their capacity for joy, but in their tolerance for input. Loving home often has less to do with disliking people and more to do with preserving internal balance. It's not antisocial, it's protective. But the nervous system doesn't always distinguish between protection and avoidance. When safety becomes the only place you feel regulated, unpredictability can begin to feel threatening by default. Not because it's harmful, but because it challenges the equilibrium you've built. Comfort starts making decisions for you, quietly, gently, convincingly. And this is where the story becomes more complex. Because what feels safe can also become limiting. What restores you can also slowly shrink you. Not because there's something wrong with you, but because safety alone is not enough to keep a system alive. If you recognize yourself here, this isn't a warning, it's recognition. Acknowledgement that your love of home likely formed for a reason rooted in adaptation, in learning how to cope, in finding peace where it was available. There's nothing broken about that, but there is something unfinished, because humans are not built for constant expansion, nor for permanent retreat. We're built for rhythm, for movement out and return in. When one side disappears, imbalance quietly follows. Home is meant to be a base, not a boundary. A place you return to, not a place you disappear into. And the people who love staying home don't need to change who they are. They don't need louder lives. They don't need more stimulation. They need meaning attached to movement, purpose attached to leaving, a reason that feels worth the cost. And that brings us to the deeper question. Not why staying home feels good, but what staying home is protecting you from, and whether that protection is still serving you, or slowly becoming a cage. Because for many people who love staying at home, the pull inward isn't just about comfort, it's about control. The world outside is unpredictable. Conversations shift, expectations change, energy demands fluctuate, but home stays the same. The light falls the same way. The sounds are familiar. The rules don't change without permission. And when you've spent years adapting to environments that required constant adjustment, that kind of consistency feels like mercy. But here's the part that's harder to sit with. Over time, protection can quietly become restriction. Not because home is bad, but because safety, when it's absolute, leaves no room for growth. The nervous system relaxes, yes, but it also stops learning. And learning, even when uncomfortable, is part of what keeps us engaged with life. There's a reason the outside world begins to feel heavier the longer you stay inside. It's not because you've lost the ability to handle it. It's because you haven't needed to. Just like muscles weaken when they're not used, tolerance for unpredictability softens when it's avoided. The unfamiliar starts to feel louder than it is. The effort feels larger than it used to, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, staying home stops feeling like a preference and starts feeling like a necessity. This is the quiet shadow of loving home. Not isolation in the obvious sense, but narrowing. The range of experience gets smaller. Life becomes manageable, but also flatter. Days blend together, time moves differently. And because nothing is actively wrong, it's easy to tell yourself that this is enough, that wanting more would be ungrateful, that comfort should be appreciated, not questioned. But comfort doesn't always mean fulfillment. Sometimes it just means the absence of friction. And friction, uncomfortable as it is often where meaning forms. Neuroscience gives us a useful lens here. The brain is constantly balancing two needs: safety and novelty. Safety tells the nervous system it can rest. Novelty tells it that it's alive. Too much novelty creates stress. Too little creates dullness. When someone strongly prefers staying home, it often means their system has tipped heavily towards safety. Not as a flaw, but as an adaptation. Studies on sensory sensitivity and regulation suggest that people who are more attuned to their internal states feel external stimulation more intensely. Social environments don't just require interaction, they require processing. Tone shifts, facial expressions, subtext. For some that's energizing, for others it's exhausting. So home becomes the place where the brain finally stops scanning, where vigilance softens, where the system feels held. But the brain doesn't know when to stop protecting unless it's gently challenged. Without small doses of novelty, the system starts treating anything unfamiliar as a threat, not consciously, physiologically. And that's when staying home stops being a choice and starts being the only place where the body feels okay. If you're listening to this and recognizing yourself, there's often a quiet conflict beneath the surface. Part of you genuinely loves being home, and part of you senses that something is missing. Not excitement, not chaos, just depth, texture, a feeling of being stretched in a way that doesn't overwhelm you. This is not a call to change who you are. It's an invitation to understand what your preference is really protecting. Because staying home is rarely about fear of the world itself. It's about fear of dysregulation, of losing the internal calm you've worked so hard to build. And that makes sense, especially if calm was hard-won, especially if peace came after years of noise. But peace, when it becomes static, can turn into stagnation. And stagnation doesn't announce itself with pain. It arrives quietly, as numbness, as lowered curiosity, as a subtle feeling that life is happening at a distance. This is the moment where self-recognition matters most. Not judgment, not correction, just honesty. If home is the only place you feel like yourself, that tells a story. And stories deserve listening, not silencing. The goal isn't to leave home behind. It's to let home become what it was always meant to be. A place you return to, not a place that replaces the world. A base, not a boundary. A source of restoration, not limitation. People who love staying home often don't need more stimulation. They need safer ways to expand. Expansion that respects their nervous system. That feels chosen, not forced. That carries meaning, not obligation. And perhaps that's the quiet truth beneath all of this. Loving home is not the issue. Losing movement is. When safety replaces curiosity entirely, life becomes predictable but smaller. When curiosity is allowed back in, gently, on your own terms, safety doesn't disappear. It deepens. There's nothing wrong with being someone who finds peace indoors. There's wisdom in knowing where you regulate best, but there's also wisdom in noticing when protection turns into avoidance, when rest turns into retreat, when comfort starts deciding for you. The question isn't whether you should stay home or go out. The question is whether your life still feels like it's moving, whether you're choosing your quiet or hiding inside it, whether home is something you return to or something you've disappeared into. And you don't have to answer that right now. You don't have to fix anything. Awareness alone changes the shape of things, because once you see the pattern, it stops owning you completely. Maybe the most honest way to understand people who love staying home is this: they are not afraid of life. They are protecting something tender within themselves. And that tenderness deserves care, but it also deserves room to breathe. Home can be a sanctuary, and sanctuaries are not meant to lock their doors forever. They are meant to prepare you for the world, not replace it. And sometimes simply knowing that is enough to let the door open just a little.